This is The Road Show, and I'm your host, David Warren. Well, today is Therapy Day with our friend Kim Har, a licensed professional counselor and a licensed marriage and family therapist. Are you ready for today's topic? When family turns into strangers, dealing with estrangement. What a topic. Welcome back, Kim.
Hi, David. It's good to be here.
Are you ready for this topic today?
I'm ready. Are you ready?
Think I am.
Hopefully, this will be a good, hopeful segment.
Well, it's kind of a heavy subject.
It is.
But it's a subject that I think touches most families. Would you not agree?
I do. You know, if estrangement has not happened to you personally, I guarantee that you know somebody it's happened to, whether it's extended family members, friends. It is such a common thing that's happening these days.
This would be a great program for someone listening to call a family member or a friend and say, hey, tune into Oasis because they're talking about when family turns into strangers. Again, we're talking about estrangement among family members. Okay, so before we get going, let's start with something on the lighter side. You, my friend, just got back from a vacation with your hubby, Andrew.
I did.
And you didn't go to Branson or Six Flags or South Padre Island. Where'd you go?
I went on my very first cruise. Have you ever been on a cruise?
I've never been on a cruise.
I had never been on a cruise, and I think I had all these ideas of what it would be like, but we went on a cruise to Alaska. We flew out of Seattle, Washington, because my husband's daughter lives in Seattle, Washington. So we went there and got to spend a few days visiting with her, and then we set sail, and we were on a 7-day cruise.
Now, you said set sail, but you mean the big ocean liner cruise, right?
Yeah, isn't that what it's called?
Well, maybe. I'm clarifying you weren't on a sailboat to Alaska.
I wasn't on Gilligan's Island. I wasn't on like a small little ship.
Yeah.
I was on, I think there was like 5,000 people on this.
Wow.
It was a huge, it was like a city on the ocean. It was like something I had never seen.
Okay, so where in Alaska did you all visit?
All right, we went to Juneau. We went to a place called Endicott Arms where we got to see like glaciers. They told us to get up like at 5 a.m. and go outside on the deck. Mm-hmm. And it was so cold. I was all bundled up and we're waiting to see these glaciers. And when you're on one side of the ship, you see one, view. And then on the other side of the ship, you're seeing a different view. So that was like from 5 to 7 in the morning. And my husband was such a good sport because he would have watched it from indoors and I wanted the whole experience. So I went outside, we froze, but it was beautiful. And then we also went halibut fishing, which, I grew up at a fishing camp in Canada, but I had never done halibut fishing. And so we were there with my husband's son and his wife, and we chartered a little boat, and there was 6 of us on this little boat. And they took us out into the middle of the ocean part, and we caught halibut.
How big are halibut?
I think they get pretty big. Ours, I think the ones I caught were about 13 to 15 pounds.
Wow.
And it was, you would reel them in and oh my goodness, your arms were so tired by the time you were reeling and reeling and reeling. And I think I caught maybe 5 halibut and my husband caught probably about the same. And it was a really neat experience.
Did you eat them?
No, we were going to ship them back, but it was like $45 a pound to have them cleaned and shipped back. And I thought I was too cheap. I thought I'm a catch and release girl. So we caught them and we took our pictures and then we released them. But it was so much fun.
Well, surely you enjoyed some seafood while in Alaska.
We did. We ate a ton of fish. I think every port we would go to, we would have some of their fish and chips or their fresh fish, and it was some of the most amazing food. It was so beautiful.
What about the wildlife? Did you see any animals?
We went on a whale watching adventure. And so where you go out and they gave you this whole culinary experience and you're eating all of these foods and you're looking out the windows and they would announce, well, there's a whale at 2:00, so everybody would run to that side of the boat to take pictures. And
would it lean?
well, I was a little concerned at first, but no. So we would see the whales and I saw more tails, like the tails would go up and it was like a feeding. And so we saw a number of tails. I wanted to see like the whole whale jump out and I just saw tails.
You were looking for a show off, weren't you?
I wanted the show off. I wanted like Jonah and the whale. I wanted a close up. We didn't get the close up.
With a selfie and all, right?
I didn't get a selfie with a whale. Although I have to admit, there were some people that had gone on a different whale watching adventure. And they got some beautiful pictures of whales where like 5 whales who had their mouths up on top of the water. And so I just saved their screenshot because I thought, well, I was kind of there. But it was so much fun.
Lovely. So would you cruise again?
I would definitely cruise again, but my thought is it was not, if you've ever heard of like the Singing on the Seas or some of the Southern Gospel cruises, I think that would be so much, I would enjoy that much more because of that, the entertainment. And I think we should do a roadshow cruise. I think we should get all of our listeners and we should do a roadshow cruise. And yes, I would definitely do it again.
Well, how exciting for you and Andrew.
It was really nice just being out away. I didn't have cell phone service, when you're at sea. And I think that I realized even though I wouldn't say I'm dependent, on my cell phone, I have it because of my business and I'll check social media like everybody else, but not being able to have access to it all the time, you realize how often you would go to grab it. And so it was a nice break where there was no cell phone while you're at sea unless you paid for extra services. And again, sometimes I'm not willing to pay the extra.
Well, I'm glad we started off with something light because we're going to deal with something serious and something that affects, I would say, a majority of those listening today to some degree.
Yeah.
To some degree. And we're talking about family estrangement. The name of today's topic is When Family Turns into Strangers. And I'm not a therapist, you are, Kim, but I would dare to say this is probably one of the most painful things, emotional things someone can go through.
It definitely is. It's probably one of the most heartbreaking because I have had clients on both sides. I've had those that have had to do the estranging and set those limits, and then I've had the family that's been on the receiving end of it. And I think that it can be equally distressing for both parties. It's hard.
Well, there is hope, and there's help, which you're going to get today, and we're going to talk about healing as well for those who are right now in a time of estrangement.
Mm-hmm. Some of the things that we're going to talk about today are, first of all, what estrangement looks like. What is estrangement? We're going to talk about who estrangement affects. We're going to talk about the myths of estrangement, the things that we've come to believe that maybe aren't true. Then we're going to talk about causes. And most importantly, how do you heal? How do you heal in the midst of that when you find yourself caught in it? Because when you are caught in it, you feel very powerless.
Okay, that's our topic. A great one for today. I'm David Warren, your host, and we'll be back with Kim Harr. I'm David Warren here with some exciting news for Oasis listeners. We have a new mobile device app. It's free, easy to download, and lets you enjoy our refreshing music and talk everywhere you go. If you have an Android cell phone, go to the Google Play Store. And if you have an iPhone or iPad, visit the Apple Store and search for Oasis Radio Network. Be an Oasis ambassador and share this news with family and friends around the world.
There's food for the hungry, joy for the sad. I found an oasis of love. Oasis Network.
Today's topic is When Family Turns into Strangers. That's a great title. You wrote that, by the way, Kim.
I did.
You get credit for that. But the subject matter is dealing with estrangement. I'm David Warren, your host. And she's not my co-host. She is our guest today, Kim Harr, a licensed professional counselor and a licensed marriage and family therapist. And maybe I'll ask you about what you do in depth here in just a bit. But let's go ahead and dive on into family estrangement. What qualifies as estrangement?
Well, I think that there's a difference between just having a strained relationship and what's considered estrangement. A strained relationship is going to be more where there's conflict. We don't like being around each other. We may get into some disagreements. We may have some limit of how much we want to be around each other. But estrangement is actually a conscious choice, and it's either going to be a physical or an emotional distancing of a relationship that you've previously had. It's not all or nothing. So an estrangement can have little contact, but it can also have some contact or no contact whatsoever.
So it could be, I refuse to go to Sunday dinner because my sister is going to be there. Or I will show up, but I'm not going to say a word to my sister while there.
That's right. I think the estrangement that most of us think about, though, is the total cutoff.
All right.
And the total cutoff is where, for either a short period of time, an extended time, or a complete permanent time, that there's no contact.
Okay, with just one person or with the whole family?
It can be, the dynamics of who it affects. It can be a adult child that cuts off maybe one parent and not the other. It can be a sibling that cuts off another sibling. It can be, parents that cut off an adult child. So there's no cookie cutter. It can affect in a lot of different relationships.
Is it more painful being a child that's been cut off from parents, or do you think parents that have been cut off from a child, or is it just pain is pain?
Well, there's no pain Olympics. So I think that, we can't speak for anybody's pain, because what's painful to me and what's painful to you, it affects us different, but yet there's very commonalities. I think as a parent, there is the belief of, my kids are going to love me forever. They're going to be in my life forever. So I think as a parent, sometimes there's hopes, dreams you have for your children that make it extremely painful. So I would say it probably is maybe more painful for parents, but again, there's no pain Olympics. It doesn't mean it's not painful for kids.
I love that. Where did you hear that? There's no pain Olympics.
Honestly, that's a Kim original, because when we go through hard things, especially as a counselor, I will have someone come into my office and one person might think it's absolutely nothing. And they may think, that's what you're upset about. You have nothing to be upset about. This is what I'm upset about. Mm-hmm. But I went to a grief counseling when I was in my master's program to become a therapist. And I had to do a class on death and dying. And in this class, I met with a funeral director, and something he said stuck with me. And he said when they do grief classes, even, a lot of times funeral homes or different places will offer grief classes, they typically won't separate, well, if you've just had a miscarriage, or if you've lost a parent, or you've lost a kid, or maybe it's been divorce, or maybe it's been the death of an animal. Mm-hmm. Because the way we relate to different things is so different that even if we went through the exact same thing as somebody else, our pain is still going to be a little bit different.
Interesting. Well, in advance of today's program, you sent me some myths of estrangement, and I thought I would read some of these and just have you either say, yes, that's true, or bust the myth. All right. First of all, one big event must have happened to cause the family estrangement.
And that's usually not true. Usually it has been sometimes years and years of experiences, and one person, they may have tried to set boundaries, they may have tried to communicate, or maybe not, but at some point they just say enough is enough and we're just doing the cutoff.
Okay. Estrangement is only when adult children cut off their parents. I think we've touched on that.
Yep. I think that, siblings can cut off other siblings, or adult children can cut off one parent, not the other. Parents can cut off children. Grandparents can cut off, whether it's their children or grandchildren. And I have even worked with teenagers that have come in, and it's almost like they're planning a cutoff. As soon as they become, 18, 19 years old, I will hear things like, when I move away from home, I am never going to speak to my family again. So it can be a lot of things. It can be siblings, grandparents, parents. It can be a lot of things.
I'm sure when they say that, you say, let's talk about that.
Yeah, and I actually don't try to fight that. It's more exploring, hey, what's going on? And I've seen siblings before, and teen adolescents, and I've seen them for a period of time. They may come in like when they're 17, 18 years old, and they may come back again later, and usually those things didn't happen. Usually there's a maturity that comes as they get older, and they recognize, maybe I need my parents more than I thought.
All right, here's another myth. It is always an unhealthy decision to estrange.
And that's not true. Sometimes making the choice to have an estrangement is the healthiest choice you can make. And what I mean by that is, especially in the cases of like substance abuse, untreated mental health, whether it's someone that continues to blow past all of your boundaries and it's causing harm, that's the time when maybe estrangement is the healthiest thing to do.
And how do you know when that is?
I always encourage people to, before you're actually going to, decide there's going to be an estrangement, I suggest you get really wise counsel. Because I think there's a part of, if I'm going to make the choice to estrange somebody, I need to make sure I'm working through, my issues, getting wise counsel from another side, because there may be some steps that can happen before a total cutoff.
Here's a myth: an estrangement will last forever.
And that's not true at all. I think that the statistics is that, I want to say, it's like 6% of adults are estranged from moms, 26 are estranged from fathers, but I want to say it's somewhere like 80% of estrangements usually end in reconciliation. And so now it can take time. It's not necessarily going to be overnight, but estrangements can last. I think the statistics are, if you're estranged from a mom, it may be like 5-6 years. Fathers are a little bit longer, and an average estrangement can go, I've read statistics on this, an average estrangement can actually be as long as 9 years.
Okay, let's talk about what caused this estrangement in the first place. Root causes. What are some common root causes that make people want to split up?
Some of the root causes really is there's a change in the whole family culture. Our society, as society progresses or maybe doesn't progress, there is more of a thought of individualism. We don't think of families as any kind of duties, obligations. We're there for each other. We work through things. There's more of a culture of choose your family. If you don't like the family you have, choose the family you want. And so some of that is a change in culture. Social media sometimes plays into that, because you can post something or read forums on social media that will say things like, hey, cutting off my family was the best thing I've ever done. Or if you write something, they can say, yes, that's the best decision you can make. So there's a change in culture in that. In addition, there are always things like, trauma, childhood wounds, childhood hurts that haven't been dealt with. But even with that, there's a culture right now of so much is considered trauma. And trauma has become a little bit of a buzzword. Mm-hmm. Now, there is childhood trauma, and there are reasons for estrangement. I don't want to discount that, because there absolutely are. But a lot of people will say trauma or a toxic parent is somebody that doesn't agree with me, or a parent that challenges me, or they'll say I was traumatized by my parents because They took me to church.
I'm nodding on radio here because I have a friend who likes to use the term toxic to define other people whom she doesn't care for. And I wonder, are they really toxic, or do you just not care for them as an individual?
I think that the way people describe that is, if it's toxic, there needs to be, okay, what is toxic?
Exactly.
So I'm not just going to throw out a buzzword. And I get that a little bit as a therapist. A lot of times people will come into my counseling room and they will throw out diagnoses. And they will say things like, well, my parent is a narcissist. Or so-and-so is borderline personality disorder. And as a therapist, when somebody comes to me, and I'm only hearing one side of it. So they're going to be giving me their side of how they were hurt, how they were harmed, but I'm not hearing the other side of it. And so it can be an unbalanced it can be an unbalanced view of really being able to explore those things in a healthy, responsible way, and not just take what someone is saying as everything is toxic and everything is trauma.
In the notes that you sent me in advance, you used a word called triangulation. Triangulation. Tell us what that means.
Triangulation can be when someone who has, it can be on either side. If I'm the one who has called for the estrangement, I can actually try and triangulate like maybe a sibling. I can triangulate and I can speak bad about our parents. I can try and get them to give a message to my parents because I don't want to speak with them. It can be a triangulation between husband and wife. If, like, I'm the parent and maybe my child has estranged maybe my husband, but not me, I get caught in the middle. And triangulation is really a part of being caught in the middle, where somebody that I love is affected by this, but we're affected in different ways.
So what would you say to help somebody who feels triangulated that's listening now, like who feels like he or she is stuck in the middle of two people either arguing or completely estranged from each other?
I think there's several different things with that. One is it's important to set healthy boundaries. If I am a sibling and let's say my sister or my brother has done a cutoff of my parents, a healthy boundary may be, just validating that my experience may not have been the same experience as yours. Because even though you're the same kids in the same family with the same parents, it doesn't mean you have the same relationship. And so I don't have to try and convince my sibling what they're doing is right or wrong, but I also can limit and ask, what, I actually don't want to be a part of hearing the negativity of what's going on. It's important with husbands and wives, and I think that this is a real opportunity for triangulation and conflict, is if you are one parent and your child has estranged you and cut you off, or they've estranged your partner, okay, now how do I handle that if I still want a relationship with my child? Do I say, if you're not going to talk to the other parent, you can't talk to me? Or am I going to keep that communication open? And I think that there's no cookie cutter answer to that. The most important thing is you and your spouse coming together and talking about, how do we want to do this in a healthy manner? Do not sneak around each other. The worst thing you can do, let's say, for instance, my husband is cut off and I'm not. The worst thing I can do is sneak around and see my kids without my husband's knowledge. Because I'm then getting into triangulation and I'm hurting that relationship. I can set boundaries. I can talk to my husband and I can say, this relationship is important to me and I want to meet with our child. This is when we're going to meet. It can be keeping communication open. And that keeping communication open, it may be actually beneficial for the parent that's estranged, because there still is some communication that maybe another parent can help bring that child back.
So just to repeat what you said, don't hide from your spouse if you are meeting with a child that is estranged from that spouse.
That's correct.
And why would that be harmful?
I think because it's broken trust. It's a feeling of betrayal. It opens up a whole nother dynamic of a problem in a relationship, because if I can't trust you and you're hiding something behind my back,
What else are you
what
hiding?
else are you going to be hiding?
Yeah.
And so it doesn't mean you just give in and you're held hostage. You know, hey, if my partner doesn't want me to see our kids, it means I can't see our kids. But that may be a time to go to counseling and work out, okay, how are we going to do this? And what's a healthy arrangement?
Okay, therapist, let's say that the estranged father finds out, okay, that the mom is going to see the child because they still have a relationship. And the father says to the mother, if I'm not going to see our child, I don't want you to see our child.
And that's probably pretty common. It's like, if I'm cut off, misery loves company. If I'm cut off, you're going to be cut off too. In something like that, and again, it's not cookie cutter, that's when I would encourage you to go and speak with a professional that can help the two of you guys together. Because it may be negotiating, how do we want this to look? It may be, bringing a child in, asking family therapy, even when you're estranged. Sometimes the estranged person may be willing to come in and all of us meet together with a professional, though we won't meet outside of here. Sometimes they just want a mediator. They're like, hey, I want a voice. I'm willing to come to therapy. I'm willing to tell you what the problem is.
I assume you've done this many times.
I have done this.
How awkward is that?
I think it's awkward, but the real key is making sure that everybody's perspectives are valid. And there's a holding of all of those perspectives. Now, when you bring in the party that's been injured that is wanting to do the cutoff, it's really important to recognize they actually hold most of the power because they've already demonstrated that they're willing to do a cutoff. And so in that, with parents, there's a part of saying, do I want the relationship more than I want to be right? And in a case like this, many times I try to help family members or parents not necessarily agree, but to find some kind of truth of what the other person is saying and try to hold that perspective. Let me give you an example. Somebody may say, you traumatized me. You yelled at me. You were never there for me.
You're a toxic parent, and I don't need this. And my friends are my family, so I see no reason for us to even have contact with each other.
Well, the normal response is to be defensive and to explain why that's not true. And I think that when you are working with two parties that are estranged, it's important to recognize, how can I honor what you're telling me, rather than you saying how awful I was or how you feel like I yelled and screamed and I wasn't there. I don't have to agree that that happened. But maybe I can hold and maybe I can recognize and say, but I hear that's how you felt. That's 100% true. You felt that way. It doesn't mean I intentionally, maliciously did something. And so when I can take accountability for what I do know happened, if there's something that I can say, yes, I did yell. Yes, I did do these. I'm not going to go in and justify. But sometimes when I disagree with you, it's just being able to hold the truth that if you say, I hurt you, I'm not going to argue why I didn't hurt you or why it wasn't my intention. I'm actually going to hold the truth that you say I hurt you, that means you were hurt by me. It doesn't mean it was intentional on my part. It means you're saying you felt hurt by me, then I'm going to accept you felt hurt by me. And it doesn't have to be an accusation.
What's the name of your practice? Do we call it a practice, an office?
It is. It's a private practice, and it's called There's Hope Counseling.
Where did that name come from?
Yeah. When I was in my master's program becoming a therapist, I thought, I hear so many times when people will say there's no hope or I didn't get hope. And before I became a therapist, I went to counseling for something and I didn't feel a lot of hope. So I determined I would become a hope giver. So that's where There's Hope Counseling came from.
Well, we're giving a lot of that today, as well as help during this specific on-air therapy session. And, the best way to not be estranged is to have a healthy relationship with your family members. So let's get some tips from you, some great advice, I should say. And you're going to share strategies when we come back. And these are strategies to help us to avoid estrangement in the first place. I'm David Warren. Kim Harr and I will be back after this.
I'm Karen Jensen Salisbury, one of the hosts you hear on the Oasis Network Roadshow. For 35 years, this 1 hour of the day has inspired and motivated you, our listeners, with thousands of stories of people whose lives demonstrate the truth that with God, all things are possible. It's an hour that you should make a part of your day, Monday through Friday, starting at 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Central. The Roadshow, an Oasis Network presentation.
On today's program, we're talking about when family turns into strangers, dealing with estrangement. I am David Warren, your host, talking with I say our, for all of our Oasis family. She's our licensed professional counselor and licensed marriage and family therapist, and we're having a great session today talking about this very important and interesting topic. And something that comes to mind. Well, first of all, before I dive in, because what I want to ask about is like some more of the root causes of estrangement, and some can be religion, like the way you raised me, and I don't believe like that anymore.
That's right.
Or you're a Democrat, I'm a Republican.
That's a big one.
And so, okay, so let's just put that there on the burner for a second. But tell us your background in psychotherapy. I always want people to know how talented and trained you are in this area.
Sure. I have got 17 years of experience as a licensed marriage and family therapist and a licensed professional counselor. And to do that, I went through a master's program. So I did my bachelor's, I did my master's, and then I did 3,000 clinical hours where I would take my cases to a supervisor. They would look over my cases. And so it was kind of almost like an internship as you're learning to be a therapist. And then I became on my own as a licensed private practitioner. And
for more information on Kim Harr, you can visit her website, there'shopehere.com. There'shopehere.com. So we're talking about family estrangement, and before we talk about avoiding it, let's kind of talk more about some of the causes, or
Sure.
What are some of the most common ways that families have fallings out?
Some of it is a lack of parents not wanting or recognizing their kids' individuation as adults. And like you mentioned earlier,
in other words, you're not a mini-me, and I want
That's
you.
right.
I want you to go to the same kind of church I raised
That's
you
right.
in.
I want you to vote the way I do. I want you to think about things the way I do. And it can be a belief of our kids are an extension of us, and so they represent us. And that can be a really big thing. I think that you will see this in ways like political. It can be one likes this, candidate that's running for president, one likes this one. It can be churches, especially nowadays. It is, when we grew up, we went to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, all the time. And it may be the choice of churches someone's going to, how often they go to church, if they're raising grandchildren in parenting styles is a big one that families will disagree over. Kids will feel like their parents are very critical of them. And so they finally just say, enough is enough.
I'm out of here.
Yeah, so I think that there's a part of a parent can try to manipulate a child's life and not recognize it comes across as manipulating. And sometimes a child doesn't tell the parent this is feeling manipulating. So there's a lack of communication. It turns into conflict. And then all of a sudden we're blindsided by estrangement.
So do you feel like it's only fair to approach the subject before you estrange from the family member?
I think it's important to try and have conversations about what the problems are as they're happening and be setting healthy boundaries in place. And if those boundaries are blown through, other things are things like substance abuse. Well, that's probably a really good reason for estrangement because substance abuse is going to be affecting the entire family. It can be untreated mental diagnoses. So there are things that maybe aren't even necessarily someone's fault, but it still affects the other person. Mm-hmm. And sometimes in estrangement, one of the myths we talked about is that it's always an easy decision is the myth, when the truth is sometimes it can be a really painful decision, but by calling an estrangement, it's my only way to protect protect my heart. It's the only way to protect myself. Remarriage is another big one. Divorce and remarriage.
Oh, yeah.
When
Step parents.
Yes. Well, and when a family divorces, especially when a child is younger, if there's any kind of parental alienation where a child sides with one parent or the other, and then they become adults and they realize, hey, there was two sides to this, and they may feel like one parent has kept them away from the other parent, it can backfire. It can be remarriage, bringing new family members in and expecting us to be the Brady Bunch. That's something that when I remarried.
I was going to say, you are the Brady Bunch.
I am. My husband and I, we remarried 5 years ago, or we married each other for the first time 5 years ago. But we blended two families of adult children. And he had 3 and 1 is married. I had 4 and 3 are married. So we've blended 11 adult children together. And we had to learn it's not about making them come together because my husband and I are together. It's not, necessarily the Waltons and Brady Bunch. It's more being able to say, what do they want our family to look like? It's okay if they still want an individual celebration with, my side of the family or his side of the family. And in all disclosure, my kids usually overwhelm his kids because my kids are loud and very dramatic and the way we were raised, and his are a little bit quieter. So we can overwhelm each other. And it's really giving each other the space to just be who you are.
Wow.
So I think that those are really some of the biggest. Now, there are things like, family, if someone passes away and there's an inheritance that comes, you can get one sibling mad at another sibling, or it can be, family businesses. So there aren't just a few reasons for estrangement. There's actually a lot of them.
All right. So obviously the goal is to avoid estrangement.
Absolutely.
In the first place. So we need healthy relationships. So let's talk about building healthy relationships that would not lend themselves to family estrangement.
I think the biggest part of that is, we touched on that a little bit, is as a parent, we need to allow our kids to individuate and become the adults that they want to become. And it's recognizing that they're going to make decisions that I may not agree with, but how can I let them make those decisions? And maybe I can ask permission to speak into them, but I'm not going to be critical. It's being able to say, hey, I have a concern. Can I share this concern with you? It's just my concern. What you do with it is up to you, but I'd like to share it because I love you. Okay, I can share something that way rather than saying you're not doing this, or I think you should do this or this. And that can be more of a controlling, where your child feels, like they're a disappointment and you're trying to manipulate them.
And would you advise that you don't need to tell the child that more than once? Like, don't make that a broken record.
You do. I mean, don't make it a broken record. If you're pestering and bugging them, if you are saying the same thing over and over again, I like to say it's a little bit like the old cartoon Charlie Brown, his school teacher. If anybody, yeah.
They'll tune you out is what you're saying.
That's right. They will tune you out. Their eyes will get glassy. They will say things like, yeah, uh-huh. But they're so over it. They don't want to hear that broken record, and they'll push you away. They'll stop talking to you. They will stop asking you your opinion. And this is a part, to have a healthy relationship, especially as our kids get older. It's hard to see them as adults because they're our kids. But in recognizing that these are my kids, but they're adults, and they're the ones that are responsible for their decisions. I had my chance. I got to make my choices in how I wanted to raise my kids. I had my choices in who I wanted to marry. I've made my choices. So my goal, and I use this illustration, as parents, in the very beginning when our kids are little, we are like that bowling ball apparatus that you put in the middle of the bowling lane. And, you put the bowling ball on the apparatus, and all your little kid has to do is just kind of aim it and let the ball go, and they're guaranteed a strike. But as they get older, maybe middle school years, we are more their bumper pads. They're going to make more, have more freedom, make more choices, but we're their bumper pads, so they're not going to get gutter balls. As our kids individuate and they become adults, we're not in that lane anymore. we become in that bowling lane that's next to theirs. And we're there if they ask for guidance. We're there to support them, but we've got to be invited into their lane.
All right, so just quickly, because I want to get help if there has been an estrangement, your advice, but it's just so open communication, and if there's something that concerns me that you're doing as my child, as my adult child, let's say, then I say, is it okay if I share some thoughts I have about, church attendance or
would you
politics?
Be open? Would you be open to my opinion? It's just my opinion, but I'd like to give it, and what you do with it's up to you.
And if I, as the adult child, say, well, I really don't want to go down that lane,
then I respect that.
Okay.
Then I need to know when I need to back off and how I need to allow you that space, because the more I can do that, I'm showing my child that I respect them. I'm showing them that I'm there for them. They can come and ask me, but I'm not overtaking them.
And you've planted the idea in the adult child that there is something that the parent does want to share if and when the adult child is ready to hear it.
Sometimes also coming at things with a curiosity. If a child says something that you're like, oh my goodness, I don't agree with that, rather than forcing my opinion, because not everybody wants your opinion, it's really asking questions like, how did you come to that decision? What does it mean to you? So I'm coming with curiosity, not with judgment.
And I mean, here's an obvious one, but folks, if you know your child attends a different kind of church that you do as an adult, or votes differently than you do, don't bring it up at the table.
No, never humiliate.
Or don't be ray-rahing your type of belief or your political beliefs at the table when you know that's a burr under the saddle of especially a child.
That's right. As parents, when our kids are young, it's our job to train them. I heard the other day a great analogy. I forget who said it, but they said when our kids are in the home with us when they're little, it's almost like an internship. So that when they get older and they individuate and begin their own families, that's when they're really beginning to live. So we are that training ground. What they do with that, they're going to make their own mistakes. They're going to make their own decisions. But we need to give them that space.
Okay, before we take our final break, give us some strategies if an estrangement has taken place. Okay, let's start with if I'm the one who cut off the relationship. I initiated the estrangement.
If you initiate the estrangement, I always say start out small with small boundaries in place. And what I mean by that is before you do a complete cutoff, it may be, let's say you've got your children, you're going to your parents' house, they want to take your grandkids somewhere, you've said no. If a parent will undermine you and tell the kid, well, I wanted to take you, but your mom or your dad said no. And if you feel like you're being undermined, have a conversation with your parents, set a boundary and say, you know what, if you choose to do this, we're not going to bring the kids over, or we're not going to do this. So begin with small boundaries first. And if there's boundary violations, because there are boundary resistant people, then work your way towards a complete cutoff if that's what you need. I always say explore it in counseling first. Talk to somebody that's got some wisdom. Maybe consider family therapy. It may be saying, you know what, I'm not willing to talk to you outside of therapy, but if you're willing to come with me, I'm willing to really talk about this issue with the mediation of someone else. You might consider, if you do a cutoff, write a letter to your whoever it is, whether it's a sibling, whether it's a parent, write a letter maybe explaining why the cutoff, even if you're cutting it off, because maybe they can take that with them to a professional themselves.
Good suggestion.
And that way that professional says, hey, these are the things that we can work on.
What if I'm the person that was cut off? I was estranged.
If you're that person, I think the very first thing is give the family member that has done the cutoff, give them some space. Because obviously they don't feel heard, they don't feel listened to, they don't feel emotionally safe. So if you're pestering them and you're bugging them, you are just...
Like, why did you do this to me? Why aren't you talking to me?
Right. All you're going to do is you're going to make the estrangement worse. You definitely don't want to try and do like an emotional manipulation, like, well, of all the things I've done for you, how could you do this to me? And remember when I did this? Or manipulation can be things like saying, well, at least I hear that I hurt you in this way, but at least you didn't have, a father that was an alcoholic and beat you. And that may be something like a parent says of their parent. So it minimizes a child's experience. So at least you didn't have it as bad as me. I'm actually minimizing their experience. So I need to give them space. I need to not defend. And that's such a natural response when things are said, because there will be hurtful accusations that are made that pierce your heart. And we want to come back, that knee-jerk reaction and tell them why they're wrong or why that wasn't our intention. And we need to just listen and sometimes just hold that and leave and say, you know what, hey, I'd like to think about that. Can we talk about it at a later date? Don't have a knee-jerk reaction. You want to reach out to your kids, let them know you're there to support them, but then back off. Give them the space that they're asking for. And it may be that initially, if someone has cut you off, it may initially be where you wait a month and you send a short, maybe a short text or a short phone call message saying, hey, just wanted to know, if we could meet somewhere, if we could meet with maybe a professional. If they don't respond, don't text them again. Don't call them again. Don't pester. Maybe wait 3 or 4 months. And it may be just checking in, saying, hey, just checking in. I hadn't heard from you. Wanted to see if you had any response, but make it short and sweet. Mm-hmm. If you're still
don't go into anything with some long text about the past and issues.
Don't send stories that say, I was thinking about you today when you were a little child and you did this and it made me smile, and because that feels very manipulative. Uh-huh. So if they continue to not respond, you know what? It may be waiting a year. And then it may be sending just whether a text or a card on a birthday saying, hey, just want you to know I'm here and I love you. But don't pester your kids.
Well, whether you are the one who initiated the estrangement or the one who was estranged or cut off, there is definitely emotional pain involved in that type of interaction. So we're going to take a break, and when we come back for our final minutes, Kim, you're going to give some helpful information on how to heal from the painful effects of an estrangement. Kim Harr and David Warren here. We'll be back for the wrap-up after this. I'm David Warren, Program Director at Oasis Radio Network and one of the hosts of this podcast. All of our hosts enjoy hearing from you, our listening family, so drop us a note. Our email address is roadshow@oasisnetwork.org. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast and you'll receive new episodes on your mobile devices. And now, back to the show. Well, this has been an interesting hour. Would you not agree, Kim Harr?
I would agree, David.
What an interesting and important subject we have covered today. When family turns into strangers, we're talking about dealing with estrangement. If you want to reach out to Kim Harr, her website address is there'shopehere.com. There'shopehere.com. Do we still give old-fashioned phone numbers, Kim?
We do.
Okay, 918-277-0777. 918-277-0777. All right. Okay, let's talk about the post effects of an estrangement.
Yeah.
There have been wounds, emotional wounds I'm referring to, and we want to heal any kind of wound. So give us some advice as a licensed therapist about healing, whether we're the one who feels like we had to cut off the relationship or we're the one who was cut off.
I think either way, there's a recognizing that there are so many feelings that both sides of that have. And part of the healing is if you're the one that had to initiate the cutoff, there's a part of recognizing some of the feelings that you're probably going to be hit with is you can feel very blamed. You can feel guilty. You can feel like, gosh, I'm not a very good kid. You can feel sad, anger, grief. And you can feel judged by other people. When we were talking about triangulation, our friendships can change because we can be judged by people as, being an entitled child or a bad parent or, so I think there's a part of just recognizing that there's a lot of grieving that's going to come from that. And that's not just a quick fix. So allow yourself those emotions and, not to belabor the point, but sometimes working with a professional can help with that. I think that also recognizing that even though it was a hard thing, if you're the one that had to do the cutoff, it doesn't mean that it was the wrong thing. It also doesn't mean it has to be the final thing. So there's a part of being able to say, you know what, this is what, is healthiest in this moment, but it doesn't mean it has to be forever. So give yourself that hope that things can change. Be willing to reevaluate the relationship. It may be give it a bit of time and try to reach out, set healthy boundaries, but maybe reevaluate that because people do change. People want to change. People do change. Sometimes they don't, but it's worth a reevaluation. I like to say, bless, don't blame. Even though you may have had to do a cutoff, don't allow anger and bitterness to take root in your heart. Don't do things like go on social media and announce to everybody how terrible this person was and humiliate somebody. Don't perpetuate the wound because it makes it that much harder for it to heal someday. Don't triangulate others in your decision. These are very private things that are happening in families, so you don't want to necessarily just go air it to the public and make it where it's not a big deal, because it really is a big deal. And in healing, I would say guard your other relationships. So if you're like a sibling that is cut off, you're an adult child, but you have a sibling and you've made the decision to cut off your parents. Don't tell the other sibling, if you want to have a relationship with me, you have to cut them off too. So don't get other people involved in those necessary boundaries, you don't want to spread offenses. So be really careful. And I think that it's important to, even if you chose not to reconcile, it's important that you forgive. And it may be working on forgiving yourself for if you feel like I'm a bad kid for doing this, give yourself that self-love and compassion that says, you know what, I am a good person and I am a good kid. This is what I'm doing for my health. Now, if you're the one that's been cut off, the initial thing you want to do is isolate, because some of the feelings are you feel blamed as well. You've had usually things said about you that are very hurtful, and you can be embarrassed, and you don't want to be around your friends. You don't want to be around other people because you feel like they're judging you as this terrible parent. It can be painful for you to be around people when you see them having good relationships with their family, and it can just remind you that you don't have a good relationship. So the knee jerk is maybe to isolate, but that's not what you want to do.
Stay in community is what you're saying.
Absolutely. Stay in community. Now, you do want to practice what you say, because you can have boundaries. You don't owe everybody an explanation of everything that's happening. If somebody comes and says, hey, how's your adult kid? It doesn't mean you owe them all the details and tell them what's going on. It may be if somebody hasn't earned that right to know my story, I may say, if they say, hey, what's your child up to? You can say, well, they're living in this other state, but then you can switch the conversation and say, hey, tell me about how are your kids doing? So I don't have to just stay there and give all the details. I can say, thank you for asking. Now, if someone's earned the right to hear my story, I may say, you know what, we're going through a struggle, but right now I don't want to talk about it. So be able to set boundaries. Be willing to forgive yourself. Because I don't know anybody, especially as a parent, that looks back and says, I did everything perfect. Sometimes we can really beat ourselves up and say, what could I have done differently? And we blame ourselves. So there's a part of forgiving yourself for your mistakes and forgiving the person that's done the cutoff. So it's, again, working on that emotional part of it. Get into either therapy or support groups. There are some great support groups. I know that there's a support group for parents of adult children that you're in estrangement. There are online groups, so get into a support group. Grieve your loss, but then the last thing is give yourself permission to re-engage in life. Because you are going through a cutoff doesn't mean my life ends. When I'm powerless and I've done all I can do, I need to give myself permission to have friends and have fun and to continue living my life and not give up.
And I thought it would be nice to end on a very positive statistic regarding family estrangement.
Yeah. I mentioned this earlier, but I think I need to correct the statistics. It is 81% of estrangements with moms end in reconciliation. That's 81%. Fathers is a little bit lower, but 69% of estrangements with fathers end in reconciliation. And I think that because you don't know how long it's going to last, I like to encourage people to hold on to the hope of the word yet. We haven't reconciled yet.
So the statistics say more than 2/3 chance you will reconcile
That's right.
with your father or mother.
That's right. So let it have its work. Hold on to the yet. Because as long as someone is alive and breathing, there is hope for reconciliation.
Amen. There's hope, there's help, and there's healing.
That's right.
Thank you, Kim Har.
Thank you, David.
All right. Tell us your website address as we say goodbye.
All right. My website is there'shopehere.com, and you can reach me at 918-277-0777.
Wonderful. And Kim Har is a licensed professional counselor and a licensed marriage and family therapist. And what a great hour we have had today. I am David Warren, and even though she was the guest, I'm going to have her say it as a co-host with me. I'm David Warren.
And I'm Kim Har.
And it's been another great Roadshow.
You've been listening to The Road Show. If you'd like to write to us, here's our address. The Road Show, P.O. Box 1924, Tulsa, Oklahoma, 74101. Our email address is roadshow@oasisnetwork.org. The views of today's guest aren't necessarily those of this station, but we do appreciate and thank our guest for spending this time with us. The Road Show, an Oasis Network presentation.
Hey!